Oh, this is nice. This is the end. Okay. Where exactly am I? Here's the song. Oh, good. There's some things that are still unresolved here, guys. How do I get home? What do I eat? Was Ray my mom? Or a clone? Or hell, was this all in my mind? What's an Ava? Is that sort of a Freudian thing? Or, am I real? Oh, hell, does the bus run through here? I mean, I'd like to go home now, but, oh, God, where's home? Okay. I mustn't run away. Okay, I got that. Good, okay. Now, if I were to run away, let's analyze that. Where the fuck would I go? I'm on a big blue ball. Is this how you end a series? I mean, is this where we go from here? Okay, the movie better sure as hell make up for this. I'm telling you right now, because I'm stuck in nowhere land. You ran out of ink too, didn't you bastards?
Let me make one thing really clear. I really like Bendy and the Ink Machine. I wouldn't have dedicated a few thousand pages of my blog to it if I didn't. Seriously, it's great. But with that said, that doesn't mean it's without its flaws. I actually got the idea for this video from a Reddit post wherein the OP was asking why people disliked Chapter 5 so much. I remember that when Chapter 5 first came out, there was this big outcry from the fandom, and I was sitting there like, it was a pretty good chapter, right? Maybe? And now that some time has passed, it might be time to face the facts and admit that, yeah, Chapter 5 actually isn't very good. So let's discuss why it's not that. Given that BATIM is one story split into 5 chapters, the writing for one chapter can affect the others, so it's important to talk about the other parts first. So here's some opinions on, that. Chapter 1 is good, but it's also boring as all hell. You're mostly just wandering around trying to figure out how to turn on the machine, and not much happens after that. It does a fine job establishing the story and raising intrigue, I just feel like more could have been done with it. Chapter 2 is one of the better chapters. There's a lot of great world building, the pacing is good, the gameplay is enjoyable, and there's a good amount of interesting events happening. Chapter 3 is actually my favorite chapter. It's not perfect, the gameplay in particular is super tedious even after the update, but the world building is fantastic, there's a lot of great new characters, and this is the first time that we're really starting to get a plot and motivations established that aren't just I want to get off of Mr. Bones' wild ride. Chapter 4 is when we start to encounter issues. The biggest and most glaring problem is the ending, wherein after an entire chapter of trying to save Boris, you don't do that. And because absolutely nothing else was accomplished, this chapter is completely pointless. If you had Boris die when the elevator crashed in 3 and had Alice get stabbed when she went to grab the body, you could jump straight to 5 and lose nothing. Heck, even Boris's entire character becomes pointless due to this, seeing as he ultimately has no impact on the plot. And that's a shame, because I want this chapter to mean something. The bulk of the chapter was excellent, it's just the ending that fucks it all up. To me, 4 is like the inverse chapter 5. 4 is great until the weak ending, while 5 is weak until the great ending. I think the best way I can explain it is that it's like Henry's motivations detoured for a second. Chapter 1 through 3 were all about escaping, and then chapter 4 is all about saving Boris, which he fails to do, and thus goes right back to escaping in 5. The Boris subplot is the closest thing to an overarching, driving goal we get in the game, but just dead ends in 4 abruptly. Also, 4 characters die this chapter: Bertram, Norman, Alice, and Boris, and not a single one of those deaths have any impact on the plot. In a good story, no character death should ever be pointless because that just raises the question of why that character died in the first place. And it's pretty easy to figure out ways to make these deaths actually mean something. Like, what if that reel that was embedded in the projectionist's shoulder was actually the last reel, and thus Bendy killed him to keep Henry from getting his hands on it? What if Henry acquired Boris's heart, and his driving motivation in 5 was trying to revive him, giving him more of a reason to go into the Ink Demon's lair? But no, like the rest of this chapter, they have nothing to do with the plot. They're basically just drive-by killings that come and go because it's a horror game. There are also a ton of plot points that are brought up in this chapter only to be abruptly dropped in 5. Things like the Bendy animatronic moving, the Ink Demon dragging off the projectionist's body, the lost ones surrounding Alice, and whatever the hell was going on with Grant's office were great ideas, but nothing was done with them. And it's a shame, because these are interesting ideas. We wanted to see the animatronic move or find out what happened to Grant, but instead it's like these ideas are forgotten as quickly as they were brought up. It's like making an ice cream cone, but instead of giving it to the children in front of your cart, you just throw it into the trash in front of their stupid little faces. Don't just bring up cool ideas, actually do cool things with your cool ideas. And finally, we meet Tom and Allison in this chapter, but even that feels like a subpar execution. While I like the idea of Alice being stabbed to death by another Alice because that, she wasn't given a proper character send-off or any sort of arc. She just gets stabbed by someone who wasn't even an established character at this point, and then is thrown away, never to be seen again. Is it just me, or is Tom the one character whose identity wasn't foreshadowed very well? The only indication we got was a vague analogy to dogs and the meaning of his name. With the others, there's a clear parallel between the characters, an emotional connection to the thing in question, or a connection via their jobs. With Tom, he's a Boris because, I don't know, our other Boris and Alice were just killed off or we need replacement ones, I guess. But all of that doesn't even hold a candle to the hot mess that is Chapter 5. Speaking of Allison and Tom, let's talk about them more in this chapter. Allison has all the personality of a piece of unbuttered wheat toast. I mean, what do we know about her from this chapter? She, likes to cook. Yeah, that's all I got. She's actually kind of preachy, except it's not really explored beyond her being Henry's personal cheerleader. All he's done so far is kill things and nearly die, so why does she think he can leave? Does she just sense that he's a main character? Thankfully, Tom has more personality, a bit too much actually. I can understand him not trusting Henry, but doing things like knocking away his food is just a flat-out dick move. Keep his dickishness in mind, we'll come back to it later. Anyway, enough of those two. So Allison gives you the seeing tool. I love the idea of having literally invisible ink in the studio. The problem is that it doesn't really tell us anything. Like, think about it. Aside from being forced to use it to escape the cell, at no point is it necessary to use it. It's just kind of an extra tool. Imagine a boss battle where the boss in question was invisible and you had to use the seeing tool to locate them so you know where to land your blows. Or a section where you have to use it to find codes written in the walls to access the film vault. I don't know, just give us something to make it more plot relevant. Even the messages revealed in the New Game Plus don't really tell us much other than Henry's feelings. It would have been so easy to answer unexplained questions with this thing, but almost nothing is relevant to the plot, save for those coffins in Chapter 2 and 3. Given how vague the ending is, using this to go back and explain earlier plot points would have been a perfect way to kill two birds with one stone. Anyway, then we run into a giant hand. Yeah, this is basically the definition of a big-lipped alligator moment. It appears out of nowhere, has no real bearing on the plot, and after it's gone, it's never mentioned again. The handbook sort of implies it's the Ink Demon's hand, but frankly that only raises way more questions than answers. So after that we find Sammy, who isn't dead. And then he dies. Thank you, that added a lot to his character. You'd think this would be the perfect opportunity for him to realize Ink Demon equals bad and ally up with Henry to take him down, but I guess dying 2 times just seemed like the better option. If you're not going to do anything for the character once they're alive again, why did you bother bringing them back at all? Fight with the Lost Ones is fine, I guess, but is it just me or does this seem backwards? The fight with Sammy, a main character, lasts a grand total of like 5 minutes, while the rest of the fight is with a bunch of NPCs. Sammy's fight should have been a lot more complex and taking up the bulk of this time, with the rest of the fight being quicker and shorter. Adding complexity to Sammy's section would have also helped break up the monotony of smacking characters over and over and over again. God, also love that monsters in the background. Would have really been interesting and made for some compelling and sympathetic characterization if it weren't run by a bunch of monsters who immediately attack you like a bunch of monsters. Anyway, remember how I said that we come back to Tom? Here's the issue. Tom doesn't trust Henry and therefore is a dick to him. Most of the time we spend with him is him being a dick, much more so than the time he's not. Now, this moment is supposed to be his character development, except his character development happens for literally no reason. He doesn't trust Henry, so he leaves him to die. Henry escapes, goes on a boat ride, gets his ass kicked by Sammy, and then suddenly Tom 100% trusts him despite Henry doing nothing to earn his trust. Instead of his character developing naturally over the course of the chapter, he sporadically changes his entire personality, probably due to the short amount of screen time him and Allison have, which is the result of another issue we'll get to later. It would have been better if he decided not to kill Henry here, showing that he's not completely heartless, but not giving him the weapon either, as he still doesn't trust him. Allison could instead slip him something to fight with, and Tom could continue to warm up to him as the chapter goes on, accumulating in him giving Henry a weapon for the final fight against Bendy to finish off his character arc. Continuing on, Allison asks Henry to lead the way, which, Why? All he's done so far is die and fall down holes. He's not exactly the best at finding his way around. And what do you know? He turns around and falls down a hole. Great call there, Allison. Great call. The best way I can describe this is the worst parts of the projectionist maze in Distracting Game Chapter 4 smashed together with a bit of fetch quest added for added annoyance. It's tedious at best and downright obnoxious at most. The closest thing to a compliment I can give it is that at least you can effectively speed run through it by going to Joey's office, grabbing the ink, and then letting yourself be killed so you respawn next to the ink maker. Another major problem is that this section causes the entire plot to come to a screeching halt. I kind of fumbled around with this for a while, trying to figure out why this feels this way when it technically does advance the plot, and that lets you go into the film vault. Then it hit me. It's because there's absolutely no world building in this part. Yes, Alice's fetch quests can get tedious, but through them we're investigating new areas of the studio, meeting new types of enemies, and worrying more about the story. There is nothing like that in this section. It's avoiding enemies we've already seen and traveling through a maze of empty rooms. Nothing else happens. Closest thing we can get to lore would be the few tapes scattered about, but they could have been put anywhere in the chapter. So really, this is nothing but a hurdle to surpass to get to the next part of the plot, and it's not even an interesting hurdle. Continuing on, you meet up with Allison and Tom again, and is it just me, or does Henry's motivation not make much sense in this chapter? In 1 through 3, his motivation was to leave. In 4, it was to save Boris. Now it seems to be back to leave, but in this part he abruptly decides to face off against the Ink Demon. Why? I mean, yes, we learned that he can leave by doing this, but how did he figure that out? His messages are too vague for him to learn what needs to be done through them. Oh boy, wouldn't that be a message. So this entire character motivation comes the hell out of nowhere and seems like an erratic and somewhat stupid thing for him to do. Allison even points out that it's suicidal, and Henry's like, guess I'll die then. So now it's time to fight the Ink Demon, and man, does it feel way too soon for this. While the gameplay technically runs for about the same amount of time as the other chapters, we've only done 4 things so far. Leave the cell, travel in the boat, fight Sammy and the Lost Ones, and avoid the Butcher Gang. Just for perspective, before fighting Boris in Chapter 4, you had to open the archives, do the library puzzle, cross the chasm, climb through the vents, play the games, track the Butcher Gang, fight Birdie, and avoid the projectionist. That is double the amount of things that happened in this chapter. This should be our conclusion, a huge build-up to a massive boss fight, and instead it feels abrupt. Heck, when I was first playing this chapter, I kept expecting something to detour Henry solely because I kept going, wait, we can't seriously be starting the fight already, can we? Anyway, House and Tom leave you, and seriously? We literally just met up with them like 5 minutes ago, what the hell? It's like every time we find them, the narrative does everything in its power to immediately separate them from us again. Do you want to know why this keeps happening? Because if you had Allison and Tom in every scene, the gameplay would no longer work. If they were with you on the boat ride, Tom could have been clearing the rudder while Allison moves the boat forward. If they were with you in the maze, they could have killed the Butcher Gang. And if they stayed during Bendy's fight, they could have helped you find the switches. So the devs effectively create traveling canyons that literally, by the nature of the game, cannot travel with you. So instead, the narrative just separates them as often as possible, which in turn makes both of them pretty useless characters at the end of the day. Not to mention things like the rushed character development that this lack of screen time causes. The scene doesn't even make much sense. Allison claims they can't go with you because they can't cross the ink. Well, first, while this is a cool idea, we've seen lots of ink creatures in the ink before, so this doesn't really hold up. But even if you ignore that, Henry could just easily have Allison ride chicken style on his shoulders and then go back for Tom or something. Or heck, there's no reason they need to hurry, so why don't they go back and look for raft supplies and come back when they have them?
They could have at least given me a weapon.
Yeah, sure, Henry. Just note that you should have asked them instead of actually going back and asking them. This is why you keep falling down holes. So on to the final boss fight. I think my main problem with this fight is that throughout the series, the Ink Demon has seemed reasonably intelligent. He's pretty consistently attempted to kill Henry, and the few times he didn't was just him showing the same mischievous nature Bendy the cartoon character has. But here, for most of the fight, he just runs around like a big dumb animal. I mean, look at him! Henry is literally right there, and he could easily reach forward and grab him, and instead he's acting like a dog that just got a new bone. Then in the next section, he is charging at Henry, only this time he's breaking his own pipes because he's too stupid to realize that's obviously what Henry wants. It actually makes him less intimidating because before I could believe he was a legitimate threat. Now I'm just wondering why we were ever scared of this dumbass to begin with. I have heard some people argue that we should have been able to actually fight Bendy in this, fight, but I think this makes sense. It's been pretty clearly established that he's effectively immortal, so it wouldn't make sense for Henry to just be able to beat him to death with a pipe wrench. For me, the issue is more the execution. All we do is hide from Bendy and flip levers. Does that sound familiar to you? It should, because that's exactly what we were doing throughout Chapter 3. Instead of a big grand finale, we're instead right back to what's effectively fetch questing. Compare this to like Brute Boris's fight or Bertram's. These were massive, intense battles where you had to rely on strategy and speed in order to win. This, which should be the biggest battle of them all, just pales in comparison. I've also heard people complain that Bendy being defeated by the last reel is a cop-out, but I'm fine with it. Ties back into the missing ending of Tombstone Picnic perfectly, and seeing as Bendy is effectively invulnerable makes just as much sense as any other way to defeat him. I think the problem is more the short length of this fight. Despite having 2 parts, it doesn't amount to much. I think maybe a few more sections and creative gameplay would have helped. Maybe, like, part 1 would be cutting down Bendy cutouts to blind the Ink Demon. Part 2, he's standing still and bursting the pipes in the walls while you try to reach the levers, creating a chaotic atmosphere similar to Chapter 1. Then maybe in Part 3 could be Henry attempting to retrieve the last reel so he can play it while the Ink Demon summons a few dozen searchers to attack, or something like that. These are just ideas, but the point that I'm trying to make is that there are a lot of ways this fight could have been more effective without actually including a one-on-one fight. And now, we reach the actual end, and yeah, I really love this ending. Yeah, believe it or not, the actual ending is the one part of this chapter I really liked. It's got good atmosphere, it does actually explain what's going on with the basic plot, at least, and it's a simple but pretty iconic ending. If the rest of the chapter was as good as this part, I wouldn't be making this video. I think a lot of fans dislike this ending because they felt like it came out of nowhere. This isn't really true, heck, it was foreshadowed all the way back in Chapter 2 with the whistling and the machine noises behind the door, but this does raise the problem of pre- versus post-foreshadowing. Pre-foreshadowing, pardon the redundancy, is foreshadowing wherein it directly hints at what's going to happen, giving the players a chance to pick up on it. For example, the flashback with the miner searcher. If you're paying attention, you can use this to figure out at least a little bit of the loop concept, and I would know because, I did. Post-foreshadowing is foreshadowing wherein the thing being foreshadowed will not make any sense until after the future event is revealed. The aforementioned whistling behind the door, for example. There's no way you could figure out that this was an alternate sketch realm created by Joey just by listening to that. And that's the issue. There's not enough pre-foreshadowing that anyone stood a fighting chance of figuring out what was going on. So when the actual reveal happened, despite seemingly being planned all along, it came across as a last-minute rewrite to many people. If more direct hints were given, I think fans would have warmed up to this ending a lot faster. I also think that it should have explained a lot more. I mean, it explains the basics, the loops, the story ideas, stuff like that. But entire sections of the lore aren't even touched upon. Stuff like who owned the Tommy gun, who left the footprints by the ink machine, etc., they're never touched upon, and some just raise more questions. Like, is Henry alive, or is he dead like everyone else? Mike Mood said in an interview prior to Chapter 5, that I unfortunately can't locate anymore, that all of the answers would be given, even if we had to figure them out. And they really weren't. We only got like 70% of the answers at best, and everything else we have to guess about are good answers from the tie-in novels. If you're going to make a series with all mystery elements, you have to actually explain said mystery elements. And because I know people who follow me on Tumblr want me to address this because I wrote the original theory, some people think that this chapter disproves Joey being Bendy. I personally disagree. After all, if Tom and Allison are ink creatures in the story, but alive out in the real world, why can't the same be true for Joey? Plus, this chapter in the books continually hint at it, and it's still the only way to explain the flashback sequence from Chapter 1. However, with that said, this means that Bendy is only Joey within the story, and that raises problems. For example, Dreams Come to Life is a prequel novel, so the two are 100% different characters. Just raises the question, if the Ink Demon is just a soulless demon that just wants to kill things, then why am I supposed to care about what happens regarding him? Heck, how does he even tie into the narrative at large? The driving action behind the plot is that people got turned into cartoons and now shit's fucked. What does this random demon have to do with that other than loosely being based off a cartoon himself? And all of that's under the assumption that he does represent Joey in the story, because otherwise the story ending with Henry defeating Bendy makes no sense, as Bendy has nothing to do with the other ink creatures. Or maybe this is his dimension somehow? Do you see why I think the ending needs more clarification? And finally, there's one issue that the ending raises no matter what your interpretation. Nothing changes. No one gets set free, nothing good happens, there's no comeuppance from Joey other than him being a massive loser, nothing. All of that and all these innocent people being tortured, and it's just like, well, shit's fucked, bye. Don't get me wrong, I think ending on the loop restarting is a good way to end the game, seeing as it ties back into the story idea, being told again and again. but only if it is broken later on, and so far there's no sign of that happening. Closest we've gotten is the BATIM trailer, but we've always been told it's not a sequel, so it can't be in the same loop that's in BATIM. Given the narrative setup and all the narrative emphasis on freeing everyone, it just feels like it was meant to have another game pick up the slack, and so far it just hasn't. It's a pretty sorry ending for such a good story overall. So that was chapter 5. Why didn't I just spend all that time bitching about a series that, as I said earlier, I absolutely adore? Well, I've heard it said that the more you love something, the more you're likely to critique it, because you wouldn't bother to complain if you didn't care. I'm not some butthurt fan, I'm not ranting about a small indie game for views, I'm just critiquing this chapter because I love this franchise and I want to see it do better. We have a few upcoming releases from Kindly Beasts, including Dark Revival and the other chapters of Showdown Bandit. I want to see these games reach their full potential and be amazing because I know they can be. I've seen them be amazing. I want to continue to see them be amazing. But in order to do that, the writing needs to be stronger, the characterization needs to be more consistent, and the plot needs to have more direction. But for right now, all we have are the books and chapter 5. So sit back, hit that pause button, and restart.
All right, Joey. I'm here. Let's see if we can find what you wanted me to see.